Black dog sighting. Hello folks. Just thought I would post my black dog sighting up on the board in case it is of use to anybody out there. I used to live in a semi-detached house in Nottingham. It had a long garden with a disused railway line at the end blocked of with wooden fencing and a full 6.5-foot hedge to the right. The left-hand side used to have a wire fence, but this had long since been removed, and growing between the old posts were blackberry bushes. This still left vast gaps in between where you could nip into next door's garden. She was an old lady we got on with well, so it never seemed worth putting up a new fence. Besides, she had 3 marvelous apple trees ripe for the picking. Anyway, one night me and a friend heard a noise outside in the garden. It sounded like somebody creeping about outside, so we went to investigate. Nothing, not a soul about. It was a frosty cold night with not a cloud in the sky and plenty of moonlight. As we stood halfway up the lawn, we heard a rustling sound in one of the blackberry bushes. As we walked closer, the rustling seemed to get louder. We thought it was a bird rummaging about inside. The bush was only a few foot high and we could see more or less all round it, but the sound continued to increase. We walked closer to investigate, and I pushed the branches apart and peered in to see a bird looking at me. It looked like a large thrush to me. After staring at me for a few seconds, it quickly darted under cover and the bush started to rustle violently. I jerked away and started walking backwards. When I had backed off about 8 feet, the rustling stopped abruptly and a black funnel of fog/mist shot out and arced into the air. As it descended in front of us, it began to take the shape of a huge black dog. Well, I say dog, it reminded me of the keepers/gargoyles in film Ghostbusters. It was roughly 4.5 foot tall and about 3 foot across, black like a panther, huge fangs dripping with saliva, and to be honest, the most terrifying sight I have ever had the misfortune to meet. It landed with a resounding thud on the turf and started to make a dry, throaty, rasping sound, building up to a deep warning growl. Then it opened its eyes, huge red glowing piercing eyes. It's impossible to explain the feeling of terror and hopelessness this produced. We both stood transfixed, unable to move or scream or even run. It was as though it wanted us to run. It was playing with us. There was a definite intelligence behind those eyes. It was studying everything about us. It seemed like an eternity, transfixed in its gaze. It stepped slowly forwards, and I heard my friend's footfalls as he frantically ran to the house, leaving me with this damn thing bearing down on me. That was it. The autopilot came on and I turned and fled with tears rolling down my cheeks in absolute terror. I have never ran that fast in my life and never will again. Pure adrenaline-fueled panic. With each step I made, I could hear the footfalls behind me of this thing in full flight, like I was being charged down by a horse. I could sense its joy in the terror it caused as I slammed into the back door that thankfully my friend had not locked behind him. The door burst open and I fell through, expecting to be torn to shreds at any moment. I managed to slam the door shut, fumbled for the bolts and locked it, and fell crying against it in the vain hope my body weight would somehow stop this huge beast from plowing straight through. Nothing. My friend had collapsed in front of the freezer, his face snow white and his hair standing on end. He was shaking and mumbling, but I was too terrified to comprehend his ramblings. After a few minutes went by, we both moved into the adjoining room and looked out the window overlooking the garden. There was nothing there, not a soul or even a sign of its presence. I then saw my reflection in the glass. I too was ghostly white. And my hair was standing up. You may have heard the saying before, but unless you have actually seen it, you would not believe how strange it looks. I stopped uncontrollably shaking after about 15 minutes and my friend managed to compose himself. He asked me what the ## was that supposed to be, or words to that effect, and all I could do was shake my head in disbelief. We tried to compare what we had seen, to try and make some sort of sense. We both agreed what had occurred but could find no rational explanation. He left in a taxi a short while later and refused to talk about the subject whenever it was mentioned. To him, he just said he never wanted to think about it again. Although we remained friends, he never came to my house again. I myself never went into the back garden of that house again. I moved 1.5 years later without setting foot outside the back door, although other members of my family did without incident. I never could tell anybody what happened. It's too crazy to try and convince somebody. Large black dogs do not leap out of small blackberry bushes, I know that, but this did. I just had to reply to this old thread, as I found it interesting that both the original poster and myself live in the East Anglia/Essex region. I've already posted this story on a thread in cryptozoology, so apologies for the double posting. When I was 14/15 I spent a lot of time outdoors messing around with a large group of friends. We would meet up after school, hang around street corners causing mayhem, the usual teenage antics. Because we were such a large group, sometimes as many as 30 people, we were often moved on from our little spots by the police, and had to find a new homes, kind of like a wandering band of nomads. I'm pretty sure it was October 1995 when this happened, and we had recently begun hanging around at an old church on a big hill near my house. We all knew the surrounding countryside like the back of our hands as we had grown up roving around in the trees, and never thought anything of the fact that we were hanging around in a graveyard at night. Anyway, this particular evening a group of 7 girls had broken off from the group and walked down the sloping road away from the church. We were a 10-minute walk away from the others, and well out of earshot. We sat down in a circle at the base of a small rise in a field, and the sun had set behind the rise so it had a pretty glow to it. We were chatting away when we heard something being killed in the bushes, like a rabbit screaming. One of my friends said jokingly it must be a werewolf, and I just laughed and said it must be a fox killing its dinner. About 2 minutes later I looked up to the rise and saw the biggest black dog/wolf/thing I have ever seen. I'm pretty sure I uttered the F word, and everyone turned around to look. I know a lot about dogs, I'm animal mad and used to be a vet nurse, and this was taller than an Irish wolfhound, but bulky like an Alsatian. It started to growl at us, and just stood and stared. I can still hear the sound it made in its throat even to this day. I told everyone to get up really slowly and walk away, and do not run, as it may chase. We all took about 5 steps, someone shouted run, and we all descended into mass hysteria and bolted back up the hill. Of course no one else in the group believed us. My best friend still hasn't forgiven me for leaving her behind, as she hated dogs anyway, and was traumatized for ages. When we all get together we still talk about it, 9 years later. I've seen many paranormal things, but for some reason this one incident still incites fear in me. On a related note, we recalled on reflection that years earlier, probably in about 1992, 4 of us had been climbing trees in this particular field and had seen 5 men with shotguns stalking in the trees. We were scared as guns are quite uncommon in Britain, and we had never seen real guns before. Also, we were scared that if we moved they would shoot us, thinking we were whatever game they were looking for. Maybe they were local farmers who knew of this wolf, and were hunting it down? Also, about 4 years ago, I had almost forgotten about the wolf sighting, and I took my dog for a walk up there. I don't often go there, as I now live about 3 miles away, and I kind of stumbled into this field not thinking. I paused on the rise as I suddenly remembered where I was, and the dog started to growl. We shot out of there pretty quick, I can tell you. This probably isn't /x/s usual fare, but I thought I might relate a weird thing that happened to me this weekend and see what you guys think. I was out at my grandma's ranch this weekend and my 2 cousins and I were walking around the property with 2 dogs, not on leashes. It was evening, but not so late that things were getting too dark to see. The sky was about halfway through the orange part of sunset. We were headed through a cow pasture towards a gate in the barbed wire fence, which I'd guess would be about 4 feet tall, separating it from the wooded area. We were basically walking along a path with the fence and trees on our right and the cows drinking lake on our left. The dogs were a bit ahead of us, when suddenly they both turned around to face behind us and started barking. My cousin and I both turned around and saw some kind of creature, like a horse or a dog, covered in long shaggy black or dark brown fur, with extremely long legs. I'm talking like, the head and body were somewhere between the size of a large dog and a small horse, but the legs were easily twice as long as a human is tall. I don't know how long it had been there, but it was staring at us and the dogs and was mostly frozen, and was on our side of the barbed wire fence, facing away from the woods. I'm guessing it had just walked straight over the fence, heard the dogs barking, and froze. The dogs started to run towards it. It sort of buckled down on its humongous legs to bring its head down to ground level, and made this massive snorting noise, and both the dogs stopped in their tracks and bolted straight into the lake. One cousin said they yelped like they were hurt when it did that, but I don't remember that. Then it just turned around and strode back over the fence and into the woods. I honestly don't remember what we did. I don't think we screamed or anything, I think we just kind of froze up. When it was gone, we bolted back to the ranch and told my grandma. She was just sort of dismissive of the whole thing and said there were all sorts of animals out there and didn't want to bother the sheriff with it. She was treating it like we got scared by a deer and our minds were playing tricks on us or something, but we all agreed it didn't even jump to clear the fence, it just walked over like it was nothing, and we all saw that it had really long hair. That's honestly it. Not overtly paranormal, but certainly terrifying.